I'm glad you're here with me today. Please follow my story until the very end and drop the city you're watching from in the comments below. My son called me on the night before his wedding rehearsal. His voice was careful, measured, the way it always got when he was managing me rather than talking to me. "Mom, we need to go over a few things for tomorrow. Are you sitting down?" I was standing in my kitchen in Greenville, South Carolina, holding a casserole dish I'd spent 3 hours making because my son's favorite food has always been my chicken and rice, and I thought maybe if I brought it to the rehearsal dinner, it would feel like home for both of us. I set it down on the counter. "I'm listening," I said. "So the rehearsal dinner is at the Harrington estate. Pretty formal. Sophie's mother has a specific vision for the evening. She's asked that the guest remarks be kept to immediate family only, meaning just the Harrington side, and that our guests arrive no later than 6:30 and seat themselves before the family enters." I heard everything he wasn't saying. No remarks from my side. Arrive early. Sit down. Stay quiet. Don't draw attention. "Will there be a place for me at the table?" I asked. A pause. "Too long to be comfortable. You're at table 4 with Aunt Rosie and the cousins from Raleigh. It's a great table, Mom. Right by the garden. Away from the head table. Away from him." "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I stood in that kitchen for a long time. On the refrigerator was a photo of my son at his college graduation. His arm was around me. He was beaming. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "None of this happens without you, Mom." I looked at that photo until the casserole went cold. And then the next morning, I found the filing cabinet. Let me back up. My husband Gerald died 9 years ago from a heart attack he didn't warn any of us about. He was 57, healthy as far as any of us knew. Coaching youth baseball on a Saturday morning. And then he wasn't coaching anymore. He was gone. And I was 62 years old with a paid-off house, a modest life insurance settlement, and a son who was 25, and living in Atlanta, and learning slowly but steadily that his mother was someone to be improved upon rather than loved as is. Gerald had a home office at the end of the hall. Oak desk, 2 filing cabinets, a shelf of engineering manuals and baseball almanacs. After he died, I couldn't go in there for 3 months. When I finally could, I moved the baseball almanacs to the living room and put a sewing table by the window. I never touched the desk, never opened the filing cabinets. I told myself I would get to it eventually. 9 years is a long time to avoid something, but grief has its own timetable, and I respected mine. My son had asked me, 2 weeks before his wedding, if he could have the filing cabinet for his new apartment. He and his fiancée were moving into a renovated townhouse in Charlotte's Dilworth neighborhood after the honeymoon, a neighborhood I'd been told, very gently, was the kind of place you can raise a family with confidence, as though Greenville, where I'd raised him perfectly well, was something to politely escape. So that Thursday morning, I went into the office to empty the filing cabinet for him. It seemed like a reasonable act of motherly generosity. It seemed like a gift. I pulled out the top drawer first. Instruction manuals, warranty cards, old tax returns from the early 2000s. The second drawer held folders from Gerald's engineering work project schematics, site surveys, correspondence from a career spanning 30 years. I set those aside to go through properly later. The bottom drawer was locked. I'd forgotten there was a lock. I stood there for a moment, then went to the ceramic bowl on the kitchen windowsill where we'd always thrown spare keys. Underneath a takeout menu from a restaurant that had closed 7 years ago, I found a small brass key with a piece of masking tape that said, "Bottom Gerald R." Even his handwriting made my chest tighten. I carried the key back to the office and unlocked the drawer. Inside was a single expanding folder, thick and neat, labeled in Gerald's careful printing, "GR Holdings, LLC Private." I had never heard of GR Holdings, LLC. In 31 years of marriage, Gerald had never mentioned a holding company of any kind. He was an engineer. He worked for Morrison and Webb Structural for 22 years. We had a savings account, a retirement account, a mortgage we paid off in 2011. I thought I knew the complete geography of our finances. I sat down in the chair that still smelled like him. Somehow, 9 years later, and I started reading. Gerald had formed GR Holdings LLC 16 years before he died. He'd done it quietly, with the help of an attorney named Thomas Reeves, whose business card was paperclipped to the inside cover with a note in Gerald's handwriting. Tom handles everything. Don't worry. You'll never have to manage a thing. GR Holdings owned a 40% stake in a commercial property on Trade Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. A mixed-use building. 4 stories. Built in 1961. Renovated in 2008. Retail on the ground floor. Office space above. According to the most recent document in the folder, a quarterly report from the property management company, mailed to a P.O. box number I'd never known existed. The building was currently 96% occupied. The estimated current market value was listed as $3.1 million for GR Holdings' share alone. I read that number 4 times. I kept reading. The largest tenant, occupying the entire 2nd and 3rd floors, was a company called Harrington Development Partners. I sat very still. My son's future in-laws. Sophie's parents. The people who had seated me at table 4. By the garden. Away from the head table. At my own son's rehearsal dinner. They had been tenants in a building my husband owned for 11 years. They had been paying rent to GR Holdings LLC to me for 11 years. And for 11 years, I had not known. I found the note at the back of the folder, written on Gerald's personal stationery, the cream-colored kind he used for important things. Linda, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you finally found the courage to clean out my bottom drawer. I'm sorry it took you so long. I know how you are. 16 years ago, I invested money I inherited from my father's estate into a partnership with a real estate developer named Carl Webb, no relation to my firm, just a man I trusted. We bought a building together on Trade Street in Charlotte. Carl manages everything through his property company and deposits my share of the income automatically into the GR Holdings account at First National. I set up a separate P.O. box for the business mail so it wouldn't clutter the house. I didn't tell you because you would have worried about managing it, and I didn't want you to worry. I wanted you to have security without the burden. I want you to keep it. Don't sell unless you absolutely have to. It will only be worth more as Charlotte grows. The attorney is Thomas Reeves. He's a good man. He knows you're the sole beneficiary. I love you more than I ever said well enough. Stand tall, sweetheart. Gerald. I pressed my hand over my mouth and sat in that room for a very long time. Then I thought about something my son had said to me 3 months earlier when he'd come home for a weekend visit and I'd overheard him on the phone in the backyard. I hadn't meant to listen. I was bringing him iced tea. The window was open. She's not difficult, Sophie. She's a retired nurse from Greenville. She's never really traveled. She doesn't know that world. Your parents are going to find her sweet, but, I don't know, a lot. Just trust me to handle her. Handle me. I'd set the iced tea on the back step and gone inside and told myself I'd misunderstood. Told myself every generous thing I could think of. Told myself that was not my son. But now, sitting in Gerald's office with a folder full of documents that changed everything, I stopped being so generous with my interpretations. I picked up the phone and called Thomas Reeves. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Reeves, my name is Linda Reynolds, Gerald Reynolds' wife. The breath he took was audible and relieved. Mrs. Reynolds. I was beginning to wonder if I'd ever hear from you. I sent letters for the first 3 years, but they came back unopened. I wasn't ready, I said. I'm ready now. I need to understand exactly what I own, he told me. It took 40 minutes. I took notes. When we were finished, I asked him one more question. Is Harrington Development Partners current on their rent? A pause. That's actually something I was going to raise with you. They've been behind for the past 4 months. Total arrears are approximately $62,000. Carl's management company has sent notices. No response from Harrington directly. Their lease is up for renewal in 30 days. 30 days, 3 weeks after the wedding. And if I choose not to renew, then they'd need to vacate. given their current projects and the permits they're running through Charlotte City Council. Losing that Trade Street address would be significant for them. Their company's registered business address is that building. Their licensing, their city contracts, their bank relationships all tied to that location. I wrote that down. Mr. Reeves, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning. I'll clear my schedule. I hung up and sat with Gerald's letter in my hands. He'd called it security. He'd called it a gift for me, for our future, for the life he hoped I'd live without him. But I hadn't lived it. I'd spent 9 years making myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable to the version of the world my son was building without me. I put the folder in my bag and drove to Thomas Reeves's office. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with a handshake like someone who meant what he said. His office walls were lined with framed photos of bridges and buildings. He had an engineering background himself, he explained, which was how he and Gerald had met. Your husband was one of the most quietly thoughtful men I've ever known, he said. He spent a lot of time making sure the people he loved were taken care of. I don't think he realized how much he underestimated you. He didn't underestimate me, I said. He protected me. There's a difference. I just didn't protect myself. Thomas looked at me steadily. What would you like to do, Mrs. Reynolds? I told him. All of it. The rehearsal dinner, table 4, the phone call I'd overheard. 9 years of making myself small and quieter and less. And now this. A building I owned, a lease I controlled, a family who'd been looking past me for 3 years while living in my property. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, I can prepare non-renewal documents. I can also prepare a formal demand for the arrears, given the timing. And I want you to be certain about this. If we serve those documents at or near the wedding, the Harrington family will know immediately that Sophie's future mother-in-law is the woman who holds their lease. I know it will cause a significant disruption. I know that too. Is that what you want? I thought about my son's voice. I'll handle her. I thought about being seated away from him at his own rehearsal dinner. I thought about 3 years of being described as sweet, but a lot. I thought about what Gerald would say. And then I remembered what he had said. Stand tall, sweetheart. I want to be seen, I said. Not as a problem to be managed. As a person. As his mother. As the woman who raised him alone after his father died, who worked 26 years as an RN to pay for his college, who never asked him for a single thing. I want to be seen. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then let's get to work. We prepared 3 documents, a formal notice of non-renewal for the Harrington lease, a demand letter for $62,000 in outstanding rent, and a letter to my son, not a legal document, just a letter from his mother, written by hand on the notepad I kept in my bag, while Thomas drafted the official ones. I had the legal documents delivered by courier the following evening, during the wedding reception's cocktail hour, with instructions to hand them directly to Richard Harrington and require his signature. I wore the blue dress I'd bought for myself 2 years ago and never had an occasion for. Gerald always said blue was my color. The ceremony was held at the Harrington Estate's back garden, 200 guests in white chairs under magnolias and late afternoon light. My son looked handsome and nervous, and so much like his father that I had to remind myself to breathe. I sat in the second-to-last row, because I'd arrived and found my name on a small card at the end of a row near the back, placed there by someone who had arranged the seating the way you'd arrange furniture practically, without sentiment. I sat there and watched my son get married, and I didn't cry. I'd already done my crying. I was very calm. At cocktail hour, I was standing near the garden wall with a glass of club soda when I saw the courier arrive. Watched him speak to one of the event staff. Watched Richard Harrington, Sophie's father, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-60s who had shaken my hand exactly once in 3 years of knowing me, a handshake so brief it barely qualified as acknowledgement, walk toward the courier with a confident expression that shifted into something else entirely as he read the first page. My son found me before Richard Harrington did. Mom, he appeared at my side, his face already tight. What did you do? I sent a gift, I said. Did you like it? This is not Mom. This is not funny. Richard Harrington just received eviction papers from a company called GR Holdings, and his lawyer is telling him that GR Holdings is owned by you. By you. Do you understand what's happening right now? I do, I said. Your father bought 40% of that building 16 years ago. I've been the owner since he died. I've also been owed $62,000 in back rent, which your new in-laws apparently didn't find it necessary to address. My son stared at me. His face went through several emotions quickly. You didn't know, he said. I didn't know. I agreed. I found out 3 days ago when I cleaned out your father's filing cabinet, the one you asked me to empty so you could take it to your new apartment. He opened his mouth, closed it. Richard Harrington approached. He was still holding the documents, and his composure had cracked along very visible lines. Behind him came his wife, Margaret, who had always spoken to me with the measured warmth of someone addressing a beloved but slightly simple aunt, Linda. Richard's voice was low and controlled. There's clearly been some confusion. Let's find somewhere private to discuss this. I'm comfortable here, I said. He glanced around at the guests nearby, some of whom were beginning to notice. This isn't the place. You chose the place, I said quietly. You and your family chose every element of this wedding. The venue, the seating, the guest list. You even chose where my son would live after today, and what neighborhood was good enough to raise children in, as though he hadn't been raised perfectly well by someone who apparently wasn't worth consulting. So yes, we'll talk here. Margaret put her hand on her husband's arm. Richard, the rent arrears are a misunderstanding, Richard said. We've been in active conversation with the property management company about a restructured payment schedule. You've been ignoring their notices for 4 months, I said. Those are 2 different things, Mrs. Reynolds. His voice shifted, became conciliatory in the way of men who are accustomed to being deferred to. I understand you're upset about certain aspects of how this wedding was organized. That's between you and your son. But this building, this lease, that's business. Let's separate the 2. I looked at him. Then I looked at my son, who was standing very still beside his new wife, who was looking at her parents with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm separating the 2. I'm telling you professionally and clearly that GR Holdings LLC will not be renewing your lease. The demand letter outlines the timeline for vacating and the process for settling the outstanding balance. My attorney is Thomas Reeves. All communication should go through him. Richard's face changed in a way that told me everything I'd needed to know about how he'd seen me for 3 years. He'd assumed I was manageable. He'd assumed I was table 4, by the garden. Quiet and grateful and uncomplicated. You understand what this does to our company, he said. I understand you've had 11 years of reliable tenancy in a building that belongs to me, and you've spent the last 4 months not paying for it. Mom. My son's voice cracked. Please. It's my wedding day. I turned to look at him. My son. The boy I'd driven to every baseball practice for 9 years after his father's team had to find another coach. The boy I'd sat up with through 3 nights of pneumonia when he was 7. The boy whose college applications I'd reviewed 17 times because he was afraid he wasn't good enough and I'd told him he was. Every single time. Until he believed it. I know it's your wedding day, I said. That's why I'm here. I wouldn't have missed it. Then why? Because I am also a person, I said. And I spent 3 years accepting less and less of a place in your life because I didn't want to cause problems. And I thought if I was quiet enough and accommodating enough, you'd turn around and see me. Really see me. But you put me at table 4, sweetheart. At your own wedding. And your father left me a building worth $3 million. And I didn't know because I was too busy making myself small enough to fit into whatever space you'd decided I was allowed. The garden had gone quiet around us. Sophie had taken a step away from her parents. We were planning a toast, she said softly. I looked at her. She was 29, pretty. With her mother's composure. and something around her eyes that looked, I realized suddenly, like shame. At the reception, a segment we were going to do, my mother suggested it. About different family styles. How every family brings something different. She stopped. Sophie. Margaret's voice was a warning. It wasn't kind, Sophie said. She said it to me directly. Not to her mother, not to her husband, to me. It was my mother's idea, and I went along with it because I always go along with things, and I'm not proud of it. It was a segment about how your son came from humble beginnings and what he'd overcome to build this life. And the examples were... She stopped again. About me, I said. Her chin dropped. Yes. What kind of examples? She looked at the ground. Your job, the neighborhood you live in, the fact that you clip coupons and drive a 10-year-old car, and my mother thought it would be charming. Relatable. She said people love a rags to riches element. Sophie. Margaret's voice was sharper now. She's his mother, Sophie said. And something in her voice had shifted into something harder and more honest. She's my mother-in-law. She raised him by herself for 9 years after his dad died, and you've treated her like an embarrassing guest since the day you met her. The silence that followed was different from the silence before it. My son made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I picked up my club soda from the table where I'd set it. I took a sip. I set it back down. I'm going to go home, I said. I want you both to have a lovely evening. I mean that. Genuinely. All communication about the lease goes to Thomas Reeves. His card is in the envelope with the documents. Mom, wait. My son caught my arm. His face was the face of someone coming awake after a long sleep, and it hurt to see it because I knew that look meant he was only now, only this moment, understanding how far he'd walked from me. I didn't know about the toast. I didn't know it was I wouldn't have. You put me at table 4, I said. He couldn't answer that. Call me when you're back from your honeymoon, I said. We'll talk. I drove home alone. Through Charlotte's downtown, past the Trade Street building I'd never seen in person, lit up against the evening sky. It was beautiful. Gerald had always had good instincts. My friend Carol was waiting on my front porch when I got home. She'd driven up from Greenville with wine, and the particular kind of loyalty that survives everything. How bad? She asked. Complicated, I said. We sat on the porch, and I told her everything while the night insects did their work and the stars did theirs. When I finished, Carol was quiet for a moment. Gerald knew, she said finally. He knew you'd need it someday. Not the money. The knowledge that you had standing. He knew me better than I knew myself. What are you going to do about the lease? I'd been thinking about that all the way home. The Harrington family wasn't evil. They were just people who'd made themselves comfortable at the expense of someone they'd decided didn't matter. I knew something about that. I'd been doing it to myself for years. I'm going to renew it, I said. At market rate. With full payment of arrears up front. And one other condition. Carol raised an eyebrow. Richard and Margaret Harrington are going to write a letter to my son telling him exactly what they planned to do at that reception and why it was wrong. In writing, through the attorneys, on record, Carol looked at me for a long moment. Then she raised her wine glass. Gerald would be furious he missed this, she said. I slept through the entire night for the first time in 3 years. The Harringtons accepted the terms within 48 hours. Their attorney called Thomas Reeves, and they negotiated the market rate, which was significantly higher than what they'd been paying, and they paid the arrears, and the security deposit, and the first and last month's rent. And it turned out they could manage it, which meant their cash flow complaints had been negotiable all along. The letter to my son arrived via courier while he was still on his honeymoon. I didn't read it. It wasn't mine to read, but Thomas told me Margaret had cried while signing it. And I allowed myself a small, private moment with that information before I put it away. My son called me the day he got back. Mom. His voice was different. Stripped of the management, the carefulness, the handling. Can I come see you? I'll make chicken and rice, I said. He drove down on a Saturday. He sat at my kitchen table the way he used to when he was a teenager with a problem, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, looking at the table more than at me. I didn't know how far I'd let it go, he said. I kept telling myself that I was just making things easier, making introductions smoother, managing two worlds. But I wasn't doing that. I was choosing one. Yes, I said. You were. I'm sorry, Mom. He looked up. His father's eyes, Gerald's exact eyes, brown and direct, and genuinely sorry. I'm sorry about table 4. I'm sorry about the things I said on the phone that I thought you didn't hear. I'm sorry for 9 years of making you feel like something to be dealt with instead of someone to be proud of. I poured more coffee, set the pot down, sat across from him. Here's what I need you to understand, I said. I am a retired RN who lives in Greenville, in the house where I raised you. I drive a 10-year-old car and I clip coupons, and I don't know the restaurants you and Sophie go to or the neighborhoods you think are the right ones. That's who I am. That's who your father married. That's who made you the man you are. I will not apologize for any of it, and I will not pretend to be less than I am to make anyone comfortable, including you. I know, he said. I know that. Do you? Because there may come a time when Sophie's parents make you feel like you need to choose again, like you need to smooth something over, or seat me at a back table, or manage the situation. And I need to know what you'll do. He was quiet for a long moment. I'll tell them she's my mother, he said. And if they don't like it, they can find somewhere else to run their business. I looked at my son. Good, I said. Now eat your chicken and rice. Sophie came with him the following month. She sat at my kitchen table and she was honest with me in a way I hadn't expected. She told me she'd known about the toast segment and she'd let it happen, and she was ashamed of that. She told me she'd spent 3 years wanting her parents' approval so badly that she'd looked away from the things she knew were wrong, and that the night of the wedding was the first time she'd said out loud what she actually thought. I want to know you, she said. The real version. Not the version I let my mother describe. I studied her. She was nervous in the way of someone doing something brave for the first time. Then come back, I said. Bring your husband. Have dinner. Let me show you how to make the chicken and rice. She smiled. It was a real smile. I decided to believe it. The building on Trade Street turned out to be more interesting to me than I'd expected. On the 4th floor, there was vacant space, half of it empty for 2 years, according to Carl Webb's property management reports. I had Thomas arrange a conversation with Carl, who turned out to be a cheerful man in his 70s, who'd been managing Gerald's share of the partnership with a mix of professionalism and deep personal respect for the man he'd been partners with. Gerald talked about you constantly, Carl said. He said you were the steadiest person he'd ever known. Said the day you stopped underestimating yourself was going to be something to see. I thought about that for several weeks. Then I called the director of the Carolinas Women's Workforce Alliance, a nonprofit I'd volunteered with briefly after I retired. Her name was Dana Chen, and she ran job training programs for women re-entering the workforce. I have space, I told her. 4th floor of a building in Charlotte's Uptown. I want to turn it into a skills training center, specifically nursing assistant certification, basic healthcare admin, CPR, and first aid. Women who want to work in healthcare but don't have the credentials yet. Dana was very quiet for a moment. Mrs. Reynolds, she said. We've been looking for a space like that for 3 years. We worked out the details over the following month. I charged $1 a year in rent. I donated equipment from contacts I'd kept from my nursing career. The certification program launched on a Tuesday morning in October with 22 women enrolled, ranging in age from 23 to 61. I stood at the front of the room and told them what I'd learned. I spent 9 years knowing less about my own life than I should have, I said. Not because the information wasn't available, because I was so focused on taking up less space that I stopped asking questions. The most important thing I've learned at 62 is to ask the questions. Know what you own. Know what you're worth. Don't let anyone else decide that for you. After class, I was packing up when I heard footsteps. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway. She'd taken the afternoon off work. Your husband texted me the address, she said. I hope that's okay. It's okay. She looked around the room. At the equipment, the certification materials, the photos of women who'd come through Dana's earlier programs, the whiteboard where I'd written the day's objectives. This is remarkable, she said. It's a start, I said. Sit down. I'll teach you something. She sat. I showed her how to take a blood pressure reading, which she was terrible at. And she laughed at herself without embarrassment, which told me something important about who she was when no one was performing for anyone. My son came to the center's 3-month anniversary event. He stood in the back and watched me talk to the women in the program, and I pretended not to see him, but I did. He looked proud. Not the careful, managed pride of someone maintaining a relationship with a parent. The real kind. The kind that doesn't calculate itself. Afterward, in the parking lot, he hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Your father would have liked this, he said finally. I know, I said. He always believed I'd get here eventually. I'm sorry it took me helping push you to do it. I held him at arm's length and looked at his face. Gerald's eyes. My stubbornness in the set of his jaw. You didn't push me, I said. You just gave me a reason to finally open the filing cabinet. He laughed. It sounded like his father. We have dinner together now, the 3 of us. Every few weeks. Sometimes at my house in Greenville. Sometimes in Charlotte. Sophie has been learning to cook. With mixed results. And I've learned to let her try without correcting every step. Which is harder than it sounds. The Harringtons have been on time with their rent for 7 consecutive months. Richard shook my hand at a city planning event last spring. A real handshake, both hands, eye contact, and said that he respected the way I'd handled things. I thanked him and didn't say anything else, which seemed to be the right amount. Margaret came to the skills center once. She volunteered for a mock interview workshop, coaching women on how to present themselves to healthcare employers. She was better at it than I expected. People contain more than the worst things they've done, and I'm old enough to know that. Gerald's letter is framed now, above my desk in what used to be his office. The building is still on Trade Street. The skills center is still running. My son calls me on Sunday mornings, and sometimes the calls are 20 minutes, and sometimes they're 2 hours, and neither of us is managing the other anymore. Last week, one of my certification graduates called to tell me she'd been hired as a nursing assistant at a hospital in Raleigh. She was 60 years old, and she'd been out of the workforce for 11 years, and she cried on the phone, and I cried with her. When I hung up, I walked into the office and looked at Gerald's letter. Stand tall, sweetheart. I'm standing, Gerald. I'm finally standing. If you've been sitting on something that belongs to you, a truth, a boundary, a piece of your own story, I hope this is the push you needed. Drop the city you're watching from in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please like and share it. There's someone out there who needs to hear it.